You don't just want to sit in a chair and listen to people talk about stuff. You want to engage with the rest of the industry, talk to people you don't get the opportunity to talk to. There will be people there whose names you may recognize, who are involved in standards and specifications, who, are deeply involved in, writing the rules for how passkey works, for example, or WebAuthn, right? Updating OAuth right the way through to folks who are doing literally solving the same problem that you're solving, but just at a different enterprise. And so the opportunity to get together with those folks in a, less formal context, and share stories, share knowledge, share approaches, help people grow in their careers and develop in their careers and change their career. All of that goes on in Identiverse as well. And now I'm going to cheat and I'm going to turn the question around, because I know you guys have both been to Identiverse multiple times. So I would love to know from you what Identiverse is for you guys.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good. I had a little bit of a stutter there, huh?
You did.
But I was about to say, good morning, Jeff. But I guess that would be, even though it is morning that we're recording, that would be very unusual for the beginning of the show. So I decided to stick to how are you?
Well, I think the morning delay is showing, right? It's like, okay, hold on a second. We still got to get warmed up here and start the brain cells firing.
I've got to get my caffeine in still. But, one thing I do in the morning is I scroll through LinkedIn. And this morning I came across a post by our friend Enrique Teixeira over at Savient. And his post was about a new Gartner paper that just came out. And it was putting some definition around this idea of non-human identities. Talked about non-human identities and machine identities and what the difference is. And so they set up a framework where machine identities is actually a subset of human identity or non-human identities. And also the other type of non-human identities are software identities. And that kind of maps to the framework that I've always had in mind, which is when you think about non-human identities, there's workloads, software, and there's devices or machines. And I started to kind of question my framework and think that, the Gartner framework probably makes a little more sense. So devices, and it's not that the word devices using the English language is a bad word for machines. I mean, they're kind of like synonyms. But I think in our minds, devices are your phone, your tablet, maybe a kiosk or something like that. So it is more narrowed down, and it would exclude IoT, like a thermostat or something built into a manufacturing device. Also, workloads, you might not think of like service accounts in your Active Directory as a workload. You might, even though I think technically it is. So I think it's nomenclature. This kind of maps to what I was thinking. But here's the thing that I took that was, I thought, funny, was that Gartner's definition of non-human identities also includes organizational entities and animals. And I was like, and animals, that's pretty interesting. Like, what is an animal identity? And then I started thinking, okay, well, potentially animals could have chips inserted into them and things like that. So maybe that's where they're going with it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I don't know where this was going, so I was trying to figure it out. I was thinking, when you said animals, for whatever reason, my mind jumped to like Neuralink and the monkeys. Are, I guess a chip in an animal makes sense. I guess it's not human, so we have to have some way to classify non-human organic beings. Now I'm starting to think like we're talking like the Borg or something like that. Human and non-human makes sense. I think it used to be carbon and non-carbon based. So this is the great thing about identity, is there's always a new framework, a new, way to look at things, a different definition for the same words that we use in other parts of the language. The key part will be making sure that everyone understands the context that we're talking about. But yeah, the animal one threw me for a loop there for a second. I was like, okay, I guess, that is something we have to consider.
Yeah, that was the later part of my morning.
Yeah. Can you imagine, I need to send an email to my dog and they have their own chip and their own identity and their own account. I don't know how that would work. I guess it makes sense. I've got GPS trackers with trackers and accounts, for my furry friends, but
well, yeah, I was thinking for your dogs, Jeff, you probably might be offended by that definition to call them non-humans.
Oh, they're non-humans. I mean, look, my dogs are my kids, but I'm not that so far.
You haven't gone that far yet.
Right.
Yet.
Yeah. Right. I don't dress them up, so there is still a distinction there that we draw. And they ride in the back in a hammock. So there you go.
Yes. Okay.
I was going to say the leash thing, but some people have leashes too. So go down that route.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've kind of gone off track a little bit. Maybe we should get just just a bit outside. Maybe we should just go over our conferences.
Yes. We've got London coming up. So this is going to be coming out the week of March, but coming up March 24th to 25th is the London Gartner IAM Summit. If you use the code IDAC425, you save 425 euros, I believe, some currency, 425 amount of. So people want to check that out. And before I get too far along, all these will be in our show notes below, but they'll also be on our website, idacpodcast.com. If you just scroll down, and anything that we've got active for, discounts will be there too. So you and I will not be there, but the one that we will be at and that we're both looking forward to is in Berlin this May 6th or 9th, and that is the European Identity and Cloud Conference. We're going to be there. We've got a discount code, so thanks out to the conference folks there. IDAC25NKO gets you 25% off, which is pretty cool. We're going to be doing some podcasting, and then you're taking vacation before that and ending Europe in Berlin. I'm starting Europe in Berlin and then taking about a week off after that to tour somewhere and then go from there. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's going to be fun stuff. So I'm going to Oslo the week before. We're going to do Identiverse. It's probably going to be the Wednesday before Berlin. So if it's possible, if that's going to work for you, and the Wednesday part is not guaranteed, it could wind up being Tuesday, for example. Please reach out to, just start by reaching out to me, and I'll loop you in with the rest of the group, but expecting a pretty good turnout.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I don't have any plans at this part. My wife and I still have not. I have a flight to Berlin, but as of right now, I have no exit planned to the U.S. So I'm still figuring that out.
Are you sure you're coming home?
I may not. Who knows? I may decide just to stay. I like London. I like Paris. So, international man of mystery. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, baby.
But I do have to actually come back for the Identiverse conference, because that's coming up right after that. That's June 3rd to the 6th, Identiverse 2025. And we have a conference code for that one as well. IDV25-IDAC25, 25% off. Hopefully people are able to take advantage of early bird discounts. I think by the time people listen to this, at least one set of early birds will be gone. I'm not sure what it'll look like on Monday when this people are starting to listen to this, but that code still is in effect, so people can take advantage of that. And obviously, if you've read the title for this episode, you know that we're going to be talking to Andi Hindle here in a minute. But let me get that out again. IDV25-IDAC25. That gets you 25% off. And then let's talk about Authenticate real quick, because I know, Jim, that's going to be coming up. And right now, the plan is you and I are going to be there as well for that.
Yeah, you really need to be thinking about it early in terms of, if you want to be a speaker, get your paper submitted. I know that's already closed for Identiverse, for example. So, folks, you really need to be thinking ahead and getting those applications in early. But I think the proposals are due no later than March 3rd. So this will probably be the last time we announce this, but go out to authenticatecon.com and you'll easily find a link to submit a proposal for speaking at the Authenticate conference.
Yep. So let's go ahead and get into our Identiverse 2025 preview. The last time this gentleman was on the show was last year's preview. We were joking before we recorded, like, man, we got to get you on to talk about other identity things other than just Identiverse. So I want to welcome back for the 5th time, Andi Hindle. He's the conference chair for Identiverse. Welcome back, Andi.
It's yet again a delight to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Well, the pleasure is all on this side of the table, but before we get too far, let's talk about Identiverse. Let's hear straight from, the source. What is Identiverse?
See, that's just a big question to start with, right? You want to start with something small, and we could talk about non-human identity some more for a bit and kind of warm up to what is Identiverse. So look, Identiverse, I've been involved for 10, this will be my 11th one. The event itself has been running for 16 years this year. These days, I think it's fair to say that we are the primary digital identity and access management conference and event in the calendar. I think, our audience tends to be the core digital identity professional, right? So folks who are doing this work day in, day out, figuring out how to keep our identity safe, how to keep our company safe, how to keep our organization safe, how to enable people, right? How to make, customers, consumers, citizens able to access their stuff in a safe way, and how to keep people appropriately private in that process, right? So, at the most basic level, that's what Identiverse is. What that means is that we have 4 days of full-on conference content. We'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, in a minute. Alongside of that, we've got a pretty large show floor where we have lots of sponsors doing lots of things, talking about all the different ways that they can solve problems for folks. Lots of entertainment around the edge, right? So we've tried for years, and we continue to do this, to make, you're going to be at a conference for a week, right? You don't just want to sit in a chair and listen to people talk about stuff. You want to engage with the rest of the industry, talk to people you don't get the opportunity to talk to. There will be people there whose names you may recognize, who are involved in standards and specifications, who, are deeply involved in, writing the rules for how passkey works, for example, or WebAuthn, right? Updating OAuth right the way through to folks who are doing literally solving the same problem that you're solving, but just at a different enterprise. And so the opportunity to get together with those folks in a, less formal context, and share stories, share knowledge, share approaches, help people grow in their careers and develop in their careers and change their career. All of that goes on in Identiverse as well. And now I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to turn the question around, because I know you guys have both been to Identiverse multiple times. So I would love to know from you what Identiverse is for you guys.
For me, it hit right when you said the doers is kind of what I have always thought of it of as, real identity people doing real identity things. Some of it obviously is conceptual and some of the ideas that are planted there, but it's just a lot of people, really smart people, fun people. It's a great community, and you get to see and hear from those folks. I think Identiverse has done a really good job over the last several years of really incorporating new and existing voices in the space. Obviously, the existing voices have been around for a while, but we need to continue to promote new voices, new ideas, new things like that come out and encourage people to continue to give back to the community. So I'm excited about that, but yeah, you hit it right in the head. It was like, these are the doers that are showing up for this type of stuff. And you can kind of, commiserate to some degree. You can articulate and, ideate, with a bunch of people, and you can also eat folks, in Vegas. So that's kind of what it means to me. Jim, what do you think when you think of Identiverse?
Well, I think Identiverse is probably the largest conference in this space now, but there are a couple that are, similarly sized, but I think at least for vendor agnostic conferences is probably the largest. I think it pulls together a fantastic group of practitioners, people that, I make new contacts every year. So I think a big part of it for me is about the networking opportunities, sitting with people at various events like lunches and breakfasts and things like that. Also just attending the sessions and hearing people talk and understanding, one thing that Andi mentioned that to me, I completely connected with was hearing, you're an enterprise and you're hearing what another enterprise did already and what their success story was because they're not going to usually come and present about a failure. You know, there are sessions almost every year where they talk about like, hey, these are things that we've done in the past that have failed, and here's things to avoid and pitfalls to avoid. All of that is how you grow your own personal body of knowledge. You know, there's only so much that you can do. The rest you have to learn from other people. And it's a great place through either personal interactions or sitting in on these sessions where you learn from other people and they learn from you. And then you make these connections that last beyond the conference, and you know, they turn into friendships over the years.
Yeah, good question, Andy. Kind of like, okay, you know, and I think there's a little bit of something for everybody too. I don't think that this is for, not necessarily just for like experienced people. I love seeing new folks to the space come to this thing.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you mentioned that. And you mentioned the you know, hearing from new voices as well, right? And both of those aspects are things that have been really important to us over the years, and which we continue to really focus on. So one of the things we started a couple of years ago in conjunction with ID Pro is that we started a newcomer session, which runs right before the sort of main conference agenda starts. The first year that we did it, actually the first year we experimented with it, it really was an experiment, and it was very last minute, very thrown together. And it told us enough that we had to do it properly the following year. So the following year we gave it some actual space, and we put it on the agenda, and we let people know it was happening. Got some really good feedback out of that. In fact, we had so many people attend that they didn't fit in the room that we'd allocated, because we were just guessing. We're like, oh, I don't know, maybe like 50 people will show up. And we had like 250 in this room. So last year we had a much larger space, with dedicated time. And again, I mean, it was absolutely full to bursting. So I usually try and show up at this thing and just kind of say hi and welcome, so that, you know, folks who haven't been to the conference before, mostly what you see of me that week is I'm up on the main stage kind of orchestrating things, or I'm rushing around, you know, trying to fix stuff behind the scenes, or I'm asleep. But you know, it's nice, particularly for the new folks, for me to actually be in a smaller space and to say hi and welcome and do those things. So last year I was a little bit late, and I kind of got there and everyone was already in this room, and I was trying to get, you know, up to the front. So I kind of, you know, worm my way through, and I get to the front and I say 4 or 5 things, and I'm like, and I'm really sorry, I've got to go because I've got a keynote rehearsal, and off I go. And behind me, I can hear Heather Flanagan, who was running this session together with Alan Foster, saying, for those of you who don't know, that was Andy, who's the conference. I totally forgot to introduce myself. So yeah, you know, we try really hard to make it a welcoming environment for folks who either haven't been to the conference before, haven't been to a conference like this one before, or who are relatively new to the industry and kind of don't know where to start, right? But the other thing that's really important, you mentioned this, is the new voices. So for those who don't know, who haven't, you know, attended Identiverse before, the Identiverse agenda, almost all of the conference agenda, gets built out of a call for presentations, which, you know, to Jim's point earlier, is closed. We've made those decisions. Thank you very much. Please play again next year. But we have a content committee that I have the honor of chairing, and we spend, you know, basically 6 weeks from the beginning of January going through an enormous number of proposals, and trying to figure out as best we can how to construct not just a high quality agenda, but also an agenda that touches on as many of the important topics as we can in any given year. Now, topics go in and out of favor, right? They are more or less important. There's more or less to say from one year to the next. But we try and construct something that's reasonably comprehensive. And so, yeah, that means including material that's suitable for folks who've been, you know, doing these kinds of jobs for 15 years. It also means including material that's suitable for folks who, you know, just started last year out of university, right? But we also want to hear from people who haven't spoken before. And so one of the metrics that I look at is, you know, do we have a reasonable proportion of, yes, well-known, well-recognized voices in the industry, folks, most of whom I know have been, you know, on the show here, right? So folks like Ian Glazer and Nishant Kaushik and Heather Flanagan, who I mentioned earlier, and Eve Mailer, and so on and so forth. But we also want to have, and we aim for about 50%. We're usually pretty close. We want to have around about half of our agenda be voices that we haven't heard from before, whether those are people who are seasoned presenters who just happen to have not spoken on Identiverse before, or whether they really are, brand new, and we get a mix of that. I think that's really, really important to make sure that we continue to offer those sorts of opportunities, and that people can hear, fresh perspective every year they come along. So,
yeah, I love hearing new ideas, and keep it up, I guess. Right? Let's try to keep it fresh. I think that's the one thing that helps prevent it from getting stale. We talked about what it is and when it is June 3rd to the 6th. Jim, do you have something you want to bring up here?
Yeah, I just wanted to just tag off of, so you talked about people like Heather Flanagan and Alan Foster, and we've had both of them actually on the podcast. And Alan came on to talk about the Mount Rushmore of identity. And he named a lot of people that folks who are listeners probably didn't even know those people. He mentioned a few people that I had never heard of. So, Alan's been in the industry since the 90s. But you go and meet him, and it's like, you could be brand new, never gone to Identiverse before, and he's going to treat you as an equal. And I think that's the community. And Identity Pro, kind of embodies that community, and Identiverse is the place that we get to meet up in person.
So yeah, you talk about Alan. I think he's the quintessential example of this. But I think that everyone in the industry behaves the same way, right? And you see that day to day in the industry, but I think you see it particularly in Identiverse. I think we talked about this last year that, it's easy to go to these things if you're new and to feel like you can't go up to people and talk to them. And I would really encourage people to go up. The worst thing anyone's going to say to you is, look, I'm really sorry, I don't have time right now. Let me try and catch you later, right? That's the worst that's going to happen. Much more likely is you get in a conversation with somebody and that leads to one of those connections, Jim, that you were talking about that can, change a career, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, this is an open invite. If you see me walking around the halls, please come up, say hello. I love to meet new people, and I think you'll find that is a attitude shared by 99.9% of the people who are at these things. Yeah, we might be busy in the middle of something, but I try to make it a point of hey, can we talk in half an hour, or hey, can we meet over here later? But please come up, say hello. We love to meet new people, especially Jim and I. So and you'll be able to spot Jim. I'm sure he's usually wearing some funky jacket. If we're in Texas, maybe even a cowboy hat. Definitely, come up and say hello, and meet new people. Look, I get it. Not everybody's, as socially, adept, maybe feeling a little bit awkward. I used to do the same way. Now it's just hey, I'm Jeff, blah, blah, blah. Great to meet you. Cool. That's it. Right. Or maybe we can get a conversation about something. So please come up and say hello. Speaking of coming up and say hello, Andy, this is in Las Vegas, which I love. I love Las Vegas. I know that I feel like I'm slowly getting into the minority of people who like Las Vegas, but as someone who doesn't really gamble, doesn't really drink, but loves kind of the show and the environment and the excitement and the plethora of activities and food options. Tell me a little bit about where this is going to be, because it's not at the Aria like it was last year. We've changed locations.
It's not at the Aria. You are right. It is at the Mandalay Bay. Now, I need to preface this with a couple of things. The first is that my only interactions with Vegas have been in the context of Identiverse. And so I don't get to see very much, right? I see the inside of the venue and that's it. And the other thing is that I've never actually been to the Mandalay Bay, right? So I wasn't able to go. We normally do a site visit and the rest of the team were able to do that. I just couldn't make the dates. And so I'm kind of working off a floor plan and figuring out where things are going to be. But I literally can't tell you the first thing about, what the Mandalay Bay experience is going to be like. I do know that lots of people have been there and probably have some good perspective. I think, on a very practical level, my understanding is that we have a lot more space available to us at the Mandalay, right? It's going to be a much more spacious environment for us to be in. We can do more on the show floor. We can do more in the breakouts. We've got, it's just bigger and better in that sense. beyond that, I that's as much as I know.
Well, let me fill in the gaps because I've been there, I guess, several times at this point. It's a great spot. It is down at the very south end of the Strip. It's kind of near Luxor, is probably the next closest hotel. So if you stay, you can either stay at Mandalay and walk over to the conference center, and there's plenty of food options, plenty of things to do, and the tram that runs. So it's a good spot. It's a good location. They're well set up for it. So I think hopefully, I think you'll be kind of pleased with the way it works out. I like it. I think it's good. It's Vegas. You can kind of get anywhere pretty quickly, either, on public transport or Ubers and Lyfts and cabs and stuff like that. So it's a good spot. Definitely approve. The one thing that I will give as a pro tip is always try to stay at the conference hotel, because you do not want to be walking. Luxor is the next closest, but it's a good 15 to 20 minute walk to go from Luxor all the way to the opposite end of Mandalay, which is where the conference center is. So you definitely want to be as close as possible and stay at Mandalay if you can.
Yeah. And I think that's a good tip generally, to be honest, right? For anything that's larger than, I don't know, say 50 to 100 people, right? Really being in the same place as where everybody else is, or the majority of people, I think is really helpful. It's more convenient for you, right? If you get tired, you can just go and bail. This is always an issue for me with jet lag, right? But it also means that those serendipitous encounters, right? The chance meeting at a bar, or, out for a run in the morning or in the gym or whatever it might be, is much more likely to happen because everyone's in that same space. So I would take advantage of that. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that's always a good pro tip. So, Andi, I wanted to kind of transition into the content that people are going to come away from the conference with. So, the focus that I think I wanted to take on this was, you guys have established a few topic areas. So let me first ask the general question. So does the topic mean, is it equal to like a track? Like you get on a topic, you're interested in non-human identities, so you attend all the sessions in that topic or in that quote unquote track? Is that how it works, or is it something different?
It's a little different, and I'm really glad you asked the question. This is the biggest thing that I have struggled with year over year over year, and we've tweaked it and tuned it, and it still isn't perfect, but it works okay once you know how to deal with it. So we do not have tracks in the traditional sense. And by track, I think what most people understand is pretty much what you described, Jim, right? Which is, okay, I'm interested in this thing. I'm going to go and sit in this room and hear about this thing for the next however long it is, right? We realized a long time ago, right? I mean, this goes back to when I first sort of started doing this, that identity is very horizontal and broadly applicable. And so it's actually really hard to build a track in that sense. People don't stick in those rooms, they move. And so, yeah, we have these topic areas, and I'll talk through them in a second, that act as one organizing principle, and that's helpful. It's really helpful for us for the call for presentations and for building out the agenda. But what we tend to find is that people then will migrate across different paths through the content. Sometimes that's to do with the vertical sector. So if you happen to work in banking, it may very well be that you go and you identify all of the things that are directly relevant to banking, whether that's because it's being, specifically about a bank. So this year we've got several things about open banking because there are some changes coming in the US that are going to have some impact there. So you might say, okay, well, there's a thing about open banking in the architecture and standards topic. I want to understand how open banking works. I'm going to go and listen to that. Then there's a thing about, I'm making some of these up, right? There's a thing about open banking security and the security topic area. I'm going to go and listen to that somewhere else. And then there are these 3 presentations by somebody from M&T, someone from Capital One, and someone from First Insurance that are all in deployment that are interesting to me because I also work in a bank, right? And so there I've gone through, 2 different actually 3 different topic areas, and I've selected things based on the material in a couple of cases and the presenter in a couple of other cases. And that's typically the behavior that we see. So back to the start of the question, right? We have, and these have been consistent now for, I want to say 3 or 4 years, if not a few more. We've got 8 primary topic areas that we look at, and those are in alphabetical order, because that's the order I've got them written down, and I have got them written down because otherwise I'm bound to forget one, and then those people will be very upset that it's like Oscars, right? It's like, I want to say thank you to my mom and my dad, and oh no, I forgot my cat. So we have architecture standards and engineering. We have a thing that we made up, which is C3 IAM. So that is customer, consumer, and citizen, and we wrap them all together. But if you put all the words, it ends up really long. So we just made it C3 IAM. We have deployments and leading practices, identity for security, identity in business. And that one's really about the business impact of identity, right? So not how do I make money out of an identity, but what impact does my identity program have, on my business, or how can I explain to my business the impact that my identity program is going to have?
Can I just say, I love that topic, Andy. I know you and I have talked about this offline for the last couple of years, but the business of IAM is such an overlooked part of the identity space. I love to see content around it. So thank you.
And thank you. And we will keep pushing on that one. It's so important because getting executives to understand why our stuff is important is hard. And some organizations have been really successful at it. And so hearing from them and then being able to take those arguments back to your enterprise and say, this is what they're saying over at Chase. We might want to pay attention to that, right? Or wherever it is. Again, I'm picking company names out of thin air, but privacy and ethics, that one's close to my heart. It's one of those adjacent areas for us, but it's increasingly important. And I think paying attention to it is very worthwhile. Professional skills and development. So that one's really about those soft skills. How do I develop my career? How do I present better? How do I present my ideas better? How do I make a business case better? Those sorts of things. And then vision, strategy, and futures, which is exactly what it says on the tin, right? It's what's coming down the pipe. So those are kind of the core topic areas that we look at. But like I say, people are going to drift across those. And it's not like when you register, you have to say, oh, and please register me for this track, right? The whole thing is open with a full conference pass. You look at the agenda, spend a little time with it before you go, and figure out which things are going to be most relevant to you. To help with that, over the last few years, we've done a couple of other things. One is that we'll typically post some blogs or other articles in the run up to the conference, which will look at the agenda through different lenses. And we've played around with this different ways. I don't know exactly how we're going to do it this year, but we'll do something that will just surface some material and reorganize it in a slightly different way. So we've looked at it sectorally in previous years. Here are the things about banking. Here are the things about manufacturing. Here are the things about higher ed. We've done it with sort of subsidiary topics, right? So we'll pick on passkey just for the sake of argument, right? Is there going to be some passkey material in the agenda this year? I think there is, but it's going to be spread out across different areas, right? There'll be some stuff about standards, right? What's coming, what's new. There's going to be some stuff about deployment, right? Here's how I rolled it out. There's going to be some stuff about security. Here are some Dean Sachs will probably come and talk about, some of the concerns that he has and how to address those, right? How to make sure your deployment is safe. That's, why these things turn up in different areas. And so we might very well do, a blog post that says, okay, if you're interested in passkey and passwordless, I hate that word, here are the things that you might want to come and look at.
So Andy, in my mind, like as you're describing this, I'm almost thinking that these are like tags on the presentation. A presentation could be tagged with financial services, presentations, or making the business case, and passkeys.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in one of those 3 verticals or topics or tags, that might be for you. In fact, if none of those are on, you're still welcome to come in. and sit in on that. Now, I have a question for you. Are there sessions that you need to pre-register for? That, in other words, is kind of limited space?
So that's a really good question. I'm just going to pick up on the tags thing first up, because you're absolutely right. That's a really good way to think of it. We're somewhat constrained by the technology that gets used and is available to us for things like the website and the mobile app in terms of how we can represent that out to the audience. So we've had years where we've had solutions that let us put those sort of, tags in, other years where we haven't. So we actually have that information in the back end. It's just whether we can easily make it available out in the front end. But it's something that we've certainly tried to do, and I know we'll try and do again if we can. But it's a good way to think of it. So if you're building your own agenda, that's quite a useful thing to do. Is just look at it, mark up the ones you're interested in with those kinds of tags, and then just build it out that way. The other thing, which just occurs to me as we're talking, which I'd be fascinated to see if somebody wants to experiment with this. Wouldn't it be interesting to grab the whole agenda in a CSV, throw it at something like ChatGPT or Claude, right? And say, hey, I'm interested in these things. Which session should I go to? I feel like somebody should do an experiment and let me know if that works or not, right?
I'll be honest, Andy, that's the first thing I thought of when we started thinking about tags. Like, this sounds like a total nerd project that I would totally be like, all right, let's throw this in here and let's come up with a customized agenda, personalized based on,
Awesome.
your topics of interest or whatever it be. But yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. Like, there's got to be an AI angle here, right? We can't get away from AI at this point.
So, Jeff, you and I are going to do this as a side project. I will get the data for you in a useful format. I'd love for you to run that and see what the outcome is. And then let's come back around, and let people know if it worked or if it didn't. Right? I'd love to find out. Be fascinating.
Yeah, send it to me and I can mention it on a future show as we get around to it, something like that. So we can refer back to hey, here's where this started, the idea.
Perfect.
And who knows? Maybe it's a good answer. Maybe it's a silly answer. Who knows?
But let's find out, right? So Jim's question, which was, are there things you have to pre-register for? So for the longest time, we have not done that. And by and large, that is still true. If you go back very early on, so way back, I want to say like 12, 13, 14 years ago, the very beginning, we did used to have some they were actually called pre-conference workshops at the time, and we did require separate registration for those. We did away with them for a couple of reasons. One is, frankly, we needed the time for the rest of the agenda. And the other is that it does get complicated just organizationally to manage all of that and checking in and checking out. And for anyone listening and for you guys who've been to Identiverse, you'll know that our sessions tend to be pretty short. And the gaps in between are not long. So, you suddenly start having to scan 300 people into a room and then 300 people out of a room. It doesn't really flow terribly well. So most of the agenda, and this is true again this year, most of the agenda, pretty much all of the agenda actually, is available to you if you have a full conference pass, right? The one exception to that this year is something new that we're adding. So this year, the conference formally starts on Tuesday, which is the 3rd of June. And we'll start with, main agenda content around about lunchtime. In the morning on Tuesday, we've got 5 discrete 2 to 3 hour workshops on specific topics. First time we've done these, like I say, in a long time. Those do require separate registration. Some of that is to help us manage numbers, and some of it because it's additional, in-depth content. It's funny, we're coming at this kind of in reverse, right? We're going to talk about these workshops, and then I'm going to talk about how those topics fit into this overall sort of theme that we've got for the show this year. So those 5 workshops are 4 specific topics that we've identified as being really key in the industry, probably not just for this year, but for several years, I expect. And then the SANS Institute is going to come and do a workshop, and those details will be coming on the website, the Identiverse website, in due course. The 4 topic areas that we've got workshops on are artificial intelligence, I bet everyone's shocked, right? You're sitting there going, wow, well, how did you think of that?
Pikachu face.
Right. Yeah. So we're going to talk about AI. But what much of that is going to do is actually explain, there's going to be quite a lot of work done making sure that people understand what AI is, right? What the different kinds of AI are and how they operate, and then what impact that has from an identity standpoint. I think it's going to be really interesting. So Jonathan Sanders leading that one. There'll probably be a few other folks involved. We've got one on non-human identity, which I suspect we'll come back to in a little bit, Jim. I was fascinated to hear about that Gartner paper, and I agree, right? I mean, in my head, you talk to people about non-human identity and you tend to get a lot of either workload or process or IoT. In my head, it also includes things like business entity, legal entity, and fascinated with the animal one. I have to say my thought went more broadly to things like supply chain. So, one of the things that came up with, I'm going to be the first person that has to take a drink on the podcast today, blockchain. Some years ago was, the whole use of a blockchain in supply chain and material provenance and that kind of thing. Well, you think about if you put, let's say, an RFID tag in, some lumber that's going to be exported from somewhere. Well, that has an identity. If you're managing a large farm and you want to put tags in your animal, you're managing identity, right? So when you talked about animals, that actually was where my head went to, was the supply chain use case.
Let me ask you a question about that.
Sure.
Yeah, let me ask you. So let's just say it is the use case for animals is the RFID chip. Is that then, if we use RFID chips on inventory in a clothing store, right? And there's thousands of pieces of clothing and each one has an RFID chip. Does that mean that all those shirts have identities?
Sure. Or maybe you group them, right? So maybe it's all large yellow button cuff shirts have an identity because maybe you don't need to know each individual one. If you're dealing with high value goods, then actually you probably do, right? So in the same way that you have a serial number for something, that serial number has still an identity problem, right? So my lovely microphone that finally, after 5 tries, I'm actually using this time around, has a serial number and it has a warranty and somebody's tracking that somewhere, right? It has an identity. Now, at the moment, it doesn't need to do anything, but if it's connected, it absolutely does need to do things. And then we have, then the thing explodes very quickly. So,
yeah, we could have quadrillions of entities around the world if we start saying that every individual piece of inventory has identities, and it explodes the scope of, originally, when I got in this industry, we were talking about people who has access to what. Right. And so now it's really taking much bigger. So I wanted to pull this back, though, actually, to the idea of Jeff and you collaborating to build an AI, because I was thinking of hallucinations. So what if you say, I'm interested in machine or non-human identities and blah, blah, blah. And it says, you should attend the session on animal identities. And that doesn't exist. That would be really interesting if somebody goes out and thinks they're going to go to the animal identity session, and there is no session for that.
That would be interesting, and that's why we're going to experiment with this before we suggest that people actually do it for real.
That's a good idea. So
who knows? Maybe it highlights gaps in topics that we never really kind of thought about that. So who knows? Yep. Maybe there will be a dog identity session next year or something like that.
You never know.
I'm all for it.
Back to my workshop. So we've got AI, we've got the non-human identity one, and we've partnered with the Non-Human Identity Institute, Lalit Chadha, to help us with that one. Again, there'll be a few other folks involved, but Lalit's kind of driving that. We're going to spend some time. We've got a workshop on personal identity. So that's digital identity wallets and mobile driver's license and all of the things that go along with that. Christine Owen and Teresa were going to sort of headline that one. Again, we're expecting there'll be a few other folks coming in to help out. And then the last one is continuous and event-driven identity, which Sean Adele and Andrew Cameron are primarily going to do. And again, they'll pull in some folks. And all of that, so those 4 workshops plus the SANS Institute workshop will all run on the Tuesday morning on the 3rd. And so if people are making travel plans, you're probably going to want to think about, getting in on Monday in the evening, probably. Those do require additional registration, right? So all of those details are up on the Identiverse website. When you go and register, you can select to add one of those workshops. And you do have to pre-select that one for sort of self-evident reasons. All of that wraps up under a sort of overall conference focus for us this year. So again, I'm avoiding words, right? Just like I tried to avoid the word track earlier. And we talk about primary topic areas. I also try to avoid the word theme. And the reason I try to avoid the word theme is that I think you go to a conference, it has a theme. There's an expectation that most of the things that you attend are going to be about that particular theme, right? So we have what I like to call a primary focus. And I think of it like an infusion, right? So it infuses the agenda, but it isn't everything, right? It's just a flavor that you get through the course of the week. And so for us this year, that's innovation, which I know is really big and really broad. But the reason that we picked that is there is an awful lot of new, right? Part of the reason we have those 4 workshops is those are 4 big areas of new development. There's a lot going. You could pick any one of those areas and say, well, we'll spend a week talking about that, right? And there are 4 of them. And I'm sure that some other group of people would look at the industry and go, no, there are 4 other ones, right? There's a lot going on. And so it felt like a really good opportunity for us to talk about some of the new that's happening, to talk about how to deal with, how to handle some of the new that's happening, right? I mean, if you're in this industry, there's enough to think about as it is. And then somebody comes along and says, hey, by the way, we're going to put RFID chips in all of our cats. How are you going to handle that, right? There's a lot of change. And so understanding how to deal with that, understanding how to make use of that, right? When is it appropriate for me to innovate? When is it appropriate for me to stick with what's tried and tested, right? Those are all things that I think are really important. And it's really exciting, right? I mean, it's incredibly exciting to see the amount of stuff that's happening in the industry is I think it feels to me like it's more than we've seen in, I want to say 15 years, and it might be longer, right? I mean, there's just a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So beyond kind of everything we just talked about, I think the last thing that I'd want to know would be, number one, what can we expect out of the keynotes this year? And hey, we're going to Vegas. What are some of the after-hour things that are planned within the conference?
Yeah, so the main stage for us has always been about setting broad context for the industry, right? And adding a little bit of what one of my colleagues likes to call sparkle, right? You want to have some fun with the main stage. And we've always tried to put on a good show, right? I mean, the AV company that we've worked with historically does an amazing job there. And it's honestly, I mean, I get to go and play on the main stage and I love it, right? I mean, it's just an amazing environment to be in. So we've got a few things, right? I guess I'll probably be up there a little bit saying some stuff. Andre Durand will be up there. So he's the founder of Identiverse originally. And it's always nice to have him along and talk about his perspectives on, what he sees happening in the industry at the moment. We've got a handful of guest keynotes that we've already confirmed. There'll be some more coming later on. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on the website as we make, more announcements as we get a little closer. But 3 that I'm particularly excited about in no particular order. So Hannah Rutter, Hannah is the Deputy Director of Digital Identity with the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology here in the UK. So she's going to come across and talk about some of what's happening here. And I think for me, that's exciting, partly because, look, I'm based here. I'm based in the UK. I am British. It's always nice to be able to put some British perspective into the show beyond just mine. But more importantly, and we did this last year, having folks from outside of North America come and help expand that horizon a little bit. There's a lot going on within the US. There's also a lot going on outside the US, and we can all learn from that sort of global perspective. So we had some folks from Australia come and talk to us last year. It'd be really good to have Hannah join the conversation this year. We've got a gentleman by the name of Michael Coates. So Michael was the first CISO at Twitter when Twitter was still Twitter way back. He was also the CISO at Mozilla. He was the chair of OWASP for a number of years, and he's done a whole bunch of other stuff. So again, hearing his perspective on what he's seeing today and how he thinks about this industry, I think is going to be really, really fascinating. And then a wonderful woman called Romy Benincasa, and I recommend people go and you can sort of look up her profile online. But Robin has an amazing history of being an endurance athlete, an ultra athlete. She has a number of world records in some fascinating long distance kayaking things. She's also a firefighter over in San Diego in that area. And has lots of other things to talk about. So that'll be something a little bit different for everyone up on the main stage. I'm really, really looking forward to that. Then we've got some folks from within the industry whose names people will recognize. So I'm particularly looking forward at the end of the week on Friday. Again, Sean Odell and Andrew Cameron are going to talk to us about continuous identity in a slightly broader context up on the main stage. I'm really excited about that one. And we'll have a few others, like I say, that we'll announce between here and the show. So yeah, lots to get stuck into. And that actually reminds me, it gives me an opportunity to say, it is worth remembering that the event really does run through until Friday lunchtime. I think if you've been to other shows, there's this sort of expectation almost built in that, okay, well, by the time I get to Thursday night, it's pretty much done, right? No. We have a big block of content, and it's really in-depth content on Friday morning leading up to the closing keynotes. If you can, it is absolutely worth staying through that, because that's where a lot of the meat of the agenda ends up being, is on that Friday morning. So really recommend that people, if you can, kind of make travel plans around that, stay through, see the closing keynotes up till lunchtime, and then head off after that if you possibly can.
There's too much good content, man. That's the problem, right? Is like, it's so much. Yeah, I always end up struggling to say, okay, I want to go to like these 6 different things taking place at the exact same time.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing every year. I mean, we have this problem when the committee and I are sort of doing the CFP process, and again, that's a 6 to 8 week process for us of really looking through. I mean, I think you guys know this, but I know there'll be people listening who don't, right? Every single proposal that comes into the CFP gets at least 3 reviewers looking at it, me plus 2, and usually it's me plus 3 others. And then we have calls for each of those topic areas, quite lengthy conversations about, okay, well, here are the things, here's what we thought, let's see what we can start. And every year we have to turn down, I mean, we had space to accept about a fifth, just under a fifth of everything that we received. And we could have picked, a different fifth, and it still would have been awesome, right? It's really, really hard. And I have a huge amount of admiration for my wonderful content committee who put in the effort. But I also have a huge amount of admiration for every single person who puts in a proposal every year. They're all great. And I'm really sorry we couldn't accept them all, right? I mean, I'd love to be able to do that. So, the end result is, we have a pretty solid week of content. It's one of the reasons why we keep most of the sessions quite short, is because there's a lot to get through. And the reality is, it's hard for people to sit through more than about 20 minutes and really pay attention. Actually, the number of people that can present well for more than about 20, 25 minutes is not large either, right? So it's one of the reasons we keep it short. And there's lots of opportunity sort of after hours to come back around, find the presenter, have a conversation, dig into stuff in a little bit more depth and more detail. And so that brings me to the after hours, which I know, Jim, you asked about. So couple of things that we already know that we can talk about on the opening evening. So on the Tuesday, right after the opening keynotes in the late afternoon, we'll have a big welcome reception in the expo hall. That's always a lot of fun. I'm hoping that we might have you guys at IDAC doing something in there. I know that's still a little bit up in the air, but fingers crossed that comes off. And there'll be lots of other stuff going on in there as well. Actually, I didn't mention it, but I talked about non-human identity earlier. We've actually, on the show floor, we've got a non-human identity pavilion. So there's going to be, a whole bunch of very specific stuff going on there. Bunch of new sponsors, new vendors in that particular space that I think is going to be really, really interesting to see. A lot of the vendors also have, demonstrations, presentations down on the show floor. So it's a pretty vibrant environment. Both for networking and for learning actually down there. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. I'm saying down there, by the way, because in my head, I'm still visualizing this in the area from last year where it really was downstairs. This year, I think it's all on the same floor, so it's a little easier to navigate. So that's the welcome reception. We'll also have a closing party on the Thursday evening. Again, remember, if you go to the closing party, that there is going to be material starting at 8:30. Please be respectful. But that should be a lot of fun. I don't have the details of that yet. I know that it's happening. I know that it'll be great. There's lots of opportunity in Vegas to have fun with those sorts of things. So I'm sure that'll be fabulous. And then I know that a lot of the kind of industry groups will have various things going on during the week, right? I know for sure that ID Pro will be doing something. I don't have the details. I just know it's going to happen. I have no doubt that there will be others as well. And those will start to emerge over the course of, the next few months between now and June. So there's a lot to get stuck into. One of the tricks, and Alan and Heather always like talking about this at that newcomer session, is pacing is really important, right? There's a lot during the week. And if you want to get the most out of it, it's definitely a marathon, right? You want to pace yourself very, very carefully so that you leave at the end not feeling like you've, completely used up every last sort of gram of energy that you have, erg of energy.
Save that for the flight at home. That's when you can sleep.
Right. Yeah.
Drink lots of water. And there's just so many good things going on. I think, in addition to everything you just talked about, of course, every vendor is going to have their own things going on. So I'm sure people are looking forward to having their email inboxes inundated with every single vendor that they've done business with or might do business with or have never heard of, inviting them to do a bunch of different things. Go have fun. Some of these events are kind of cool. It's like, hey, go take advantage of that kind of stuff. So it's a way to kind of see the town sometimes. There's a lot of different things going on, but yeah, all in, pace yourself. It's really good. It's really good life advice, not just for Identiverse. It's great for Vegas, and it's just great in general.
Sorry, you guys need a new tagline: Identity at the Center podcast. Advice for identity, advice for life.
I don't know if we can provide any good advice for either of those things, but I'll take it. Who knows? So speaking of Vegas, kind of end on a lighter note here. There's so much to see and do in Las Vegas, and I've been there many times. I think at this point, I feel like I go there at least once or twice a year for the last 15 years or so. Is there something, Andi, that comes to mind when I say, give me a place, an activity, a thing that people should be checking out the next time they go to Las Vegas?
I was hoping you were going to phrase that question as, what's your favorite place to be in Vegas? And then my answer was going to be, in all honesty, at the end of Identiverse week, my favorite place to be is the departure lounge at the airport.
I would say McCarran International. I don't think it's McCarran anymore, or whatever it's called, but yeah.
Yeah, whatever it's called. In all fairness, I get so little time when I'm there to kind of get out and experience stuff. And I know there's a huge amount to see and do there. So I'm probably not the best person to give recommendations. I will say this, though. Some of the food in Vegas some of the restaurants are just out of this world. Like world-beatingly good, right? Like proper world-class quality. And so to the extent that folks are into, really good cuisine, there's some great food in Vegas. And I think, and most of my experience there has been with the sort of higher end places, but I think if you go looking a little bit, there are some really straightforward, good, honest, home cooking kind of food, but that's really good, right? So yeah, that's my thing. I'd love to be able to get and see some of the shows and all the rest of it, and I'd love to get out of the city and go explore. There's a bunch of stuff to do and see around Vegas as well. But yeah, apart from the departure lounge, it's all about the food for me. So
there's nothing wrong with that. I still think of a nice Wagyu cut that I had 4 years ago at Identiverse at Caesars. It was literally the best steak I've ever had. So I absolutely echo world class when it comes to food and the entertainment that goes around it. Jim, what do you got for like a place or an activity or something? And I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, at least one of the things you might say.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been to Vegas over 20 times, more than 20 times. So I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record because I have to pick a few items, right? And what I want to do is pick those within the context of folks are only going to be there probably for a week, maybe tag a few days on, which I think is a great idea if you can do it. I would tag them on to the beginning, but because by the end of the conference, you're just going to want to leave. So my pro tip would be if you're going to tag on time, the preference would be before. So number one, last year I went to the Sphere. I think it was pretty new at the time. So
that's the one I thought that you would mention.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, you probably have never done anything like it before. I know when I had gone, it was a totally immersive experience. I mean, I've done IMAX and things like that, but being there at the Sphere, I had to keep taking my eyes off the screen because it was so immersive. Like I was starting to feel scared. Like I was flying cool, and super cool.
And you can see it flying in. So if you're on a window seat, raise that window, and depending on the flight landing pattern, you can see it. It's obviously much more visible at night, and they usually do cool things on the side of it, at night or around it. But it's a sight to behold.
I paused that sentence completely wrong. I had visions of the whole Sphere flying in, which was a whole different kind of.
That's a different experience, yeah.
So that's number one. That's on the Strip. Number two would take you off the Strip to downtown Vegas, an area called Fremont Street. You probably have seen videos of it. There's like an overhead canopy, which is actually like a huge TV screen. And it's like what I think you would think of Vegas if your only experience was not just going to the Strip. I mean, on the Strip, literally some of the hotels, if you get a cocktail, you can spend $35 for a margarita, which is insane, right? Whereas you go to Fremont Street, you're talking about under $10 and it's a lot bigger. So that's just an example. I think overall it's just, kind of a more authentic experience, and living within the bubble of a resort on the Strip is very expensive. And I think it's just fun to break away from that. The third thing I was going to mention, Mandalay Bay has a really cool pool. I think it's like a beach. And from what I'm remembering, it has like a wave pool. So it's kind of like that. If you've ever been to a wave pool, that's kind of the experience. And the beach, they actually have like real sand and everything. So it's been a few years since I've been there, but it's kind of a unique hotel from that perspective. What about you, Jeff?
Mandalay is a cool spot. I like Fremont Street. I didn't discover that until maybe 1 or 2 years ago, and it's one of my favorite places in Vegas. If you like live music, they have like 4 different stages with different acts playing, and the place is big enough that they're not interfering with each other when they're playing. But if you're looking for something to do Friday night, like after the show ends, like that's a great spot to go out to. I mean, it'll be busy, it'll be packed, and hopefully weather is good, right, from like a heat perspective in Vegas. But it is a cool spot to go to for sure. I definitely like Fremont Street for the live music aspect and it being outdoors. Because usually what happens is I go to Vegas, I land, I go from the airport to the hotel, and then I don't see daylight sometimes until 2 or 3 days later. But I definitely echo Fremont Street. The one that I'm going to bring up is a place that my brother introduced to me, I think it was last year. It's called Area 15. So he lives just south of Vegas, just south of the Strip. And it's this place called Area 15. It's like I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like a experience type thing. Just weird, wild, EDM type music. And it's just kind of a fun place to go to and just try a bunch of different things. They have this really cool kind of like immersive experience where it's a giant room and there's projectors, and it's not the Sphere, quality or that level, but you're in this giant room and the projectors are showing like a surround view, 360 degrees, space travel and like being on the moon and a bunch of different stuff. It's kind of super trippy, and it's a totally different vibe than anything else that I've done at Vegas. And it's off strip. So it's on the north end. I want to say it's kind of close to Stratosphere, sort of to the west of that, past the highway there. But it's just a cool little spot, and it wasn't too busy last time I was there. Maybe it was there, off times and off season, but it's a cool spot to kind of get off the strip and do stuff. And they have a bunch of different things you can do there. So, one of those silent discos, right, where you put on the headphones and you just kind of do your thing in that. Black light type things with trippy music and different visual effects. I'm sure there is a certain population that might be listening. Like, yeah, that sounds totally for me. And then there is like just as many people like, that sounds terrible, and I'm never going to do that.
So, Jeff, you've always been a big fan of Vegas. Are you a big enough fan that you would actually live there?
I would. I would not. I would probably live off strip somewhere, obviously, but I do like it. I've said my brother lives there part-time.
We know you're not that rich to live on strip.
Yeah, right. We're gonna have to get a few more sponsors, make really Identity at the Center to have me at the center of Vegas. There you go. Life goals, that kind of thing. But yeah, I would live in Vegas. I like the area, and I know it's a desert and heat's like my kryptonite, but it's a dry heat, and that's what air conditioning is for. I stay indoors and then I go out at night like a vampire. Yeah, so I would do that. Short answer is yes. And that's it. That's I'll take it. What, does that shock you in any way, Jim?
No, it's great. It's a great place. I always look at it as like, it's a great place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. But at the same time, it's like, I see different videos of, me, I like to go to the gym. They've got a number of the best gyms in the world in Vegas. So as far as like things to do and being the top quality, I think I could, but it's expensive overall. It's hot in the summer, and I don't think I want to live in the desert. It makes my nose very dry, and I don't like how that feels. So every time I visit a desert, my sinuses get very irritated. That sounds like a minor thing, but if you have to deal with that like every day for the rest of your life, that's not a minor thing.
Oh no, I get it. And I think I'm, the mindset where, like I said, I don't gamble, I don't really drink, so those types of vices, I'm probably more resistant to. It's not for everybody, I get it, but yeah, I would live pretty much anywhere. At least I would try it out. Let's just put that. Whether I'd stay is a different story, but I've been to Vegas a number of times. I would live off strip somewhere, and if I want a good meal, I can go to the strip or find any number of off strip places. There are so many good places to eat off strip. Sure. I know we went to one, and it was last year, maybe the year before that Daniel took us to. So if you get a chance to go out to dinner with RSM, do it. Go to Reed, you're doing someplace good.
Yeah.
And it's usually someplace that's not like, okay, been there before, or it's like, kind of ho-hum. Usually we're picking good spots that are kind of offbeat and interesting. There you go. Pro tip. Self-plug for us as we go on, because I'm sure we'll be doing something dinner out there for our company. Okay. We have rambled on for, almost an hour, over an hour and 10 minutes. So Andi, thank you so much for being part of this. And thank you for helping put on the conference and continue to advocate for that importance of business and the IAM track. Again, that's something I feel like we need more about that. If we need to be able to articulate the value of it, and not everyone gets identity, and we need to be able to translate it into human speak sometimes. So thank you for that, Andi.
Yeah. And it still is at the center.
It is still at the center.
It is. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
So we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Don't forget, we do have a discount code, IDV25-IDAC25, get you 25% off. Take advantage of that. Stack it up with whatever else you got going on. And like I said, open invite. If you see Jim or I, walking around, please come up, say hello, give us a fist bump. Even if it's just a nod, say, hey, whatever, that's cool. I'm always happy to meet with folks and, set aside time to kind of chat, catch up and see what's at the top of their minds, when it comes to whatever's going on. So, with that, we'll go ahead and leave for this week. We'll have links in our show notes for all this stuff, so you can check it out. We'll have a link for Andi. You can talk to him about your Vegas experiences, or Andi, when you said earlier, it's like you're rushing back and forth between things. That's pretty much how I always see you, and so I always try to make it a point and say, come over and say, hey, thank you, for your support and stuff like that. But I know you're busy, so sometimes it's just like a nod or a point or something like that. So
it's all good.
I totally get it. So yeah, there we go. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com. See you at Identiverse. Check us out on our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, do all those fun things, helps us out. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.